From Trichomes Studios, I'm Jesse Betend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we feature leaders of the cannabis industry. We talk to everyone from farmers, CEOs, and public officials, anyone making an impact on the cannabis community and beyond. And boy, must I admit that this is a strange and auspicious week to start a podcast. As you're listening to this, we're in the middle of the fallout from the spread of COVID-19 across the country, and no industry has been unaffected. We're beginning our second week of serious self-quarantine here in Chicago. Hopefully, you're listening to this safe at home yourself. To make heads or tails of everything, I couldn't ask for a better way to start this show than by introducing you to my first two guests. Today, I'm joined by Gina Kranwinkel and Adrienne Uthe. Gina is the CEO of the National Association of Cannabis Businesses, Nacb for short, where her team is working to bring uniform standards to the cannabis industry. And Adrienne is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing with Nacb. Now, before COVID, the Nacb restructured to give 6 of 7 leadership roles to women. Gina and Adrienne are 2 of them. We'll dig into why they made that change, what the group's work means for a rapidly changing industry and, frankly, world, and why it's so crucially important to lead by example, especially in a time of crisis. Gina and Adrienne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having us. Happy to be here.
So I am actually in my living room here in Chicago, which explains why things are perhaps a bit more echoey. Not than usual because it's our first episode, but echoier than I would like them. Where are you right now, Gina?
I am in New Zealand.
And to be clear, New Zealand is not where you normally live and work, right?
No. I've just been here for the last few months. We are a remote team to begin with, so it was easy to come here. And I was supposed to be heading back to the States at the end of this month. But with the crisis, borders have been shut, and we are now in officially a lockdown in the entire country. So my travels back to the States have been delayed, and I will see what happens next month. We are in lockdown for the next 30 days.
So that's absolutely, it must be wild to be essentially stranded in another country. Do you know how long you're going to be out of the country?
I'm not sure how long it's going to be right now. I'm thinking of possibly coming back in May, but it may end up in June or July. And just taking this one day at a time. I'm safe, able to speak to my team. New Zealand is handling this crisis extremely well.
So I imagine there's a lot of challenges in a moment like this, especially being outside of the country. But I'm curious just about information. What kind of information are you able to get being outside of the country? Is that sort of scary on a personal level? And how much are you relying on your team and your family members to kind of keep you updated?
Well, I think, I'm getting the best news possible. I'm speaking to my team almost every day and with family and friends. And so it's easy to be able to get that information, thankfully, in this day and age.
Adrienne, what's it like to have your boss stuck in another country?
You know what? It's pretty wild. But fortunately for us, Gina and I have always had a pretty close relationship, and we've always had a lot of close contact. So in some ways, it's not so indifferent to how it used to be, but it's also extremely different because she's under a much heavier quarantine than I am personally. So I'm actually in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we're on our second week of quarantine here. But we're still able to have some freedoms that I believe Gina doesn't have. So just on that level and on a humanistic level, it's a little bit different. But as far as communication goes, her and I communicate on multiple different channels anyway. So in that regard, it's somewhat the same, but on a humanistic level, it's definitely different.
I imagine that communicating with time differences and stuff like that, has it shifted how you do work already on top of the other things that we're dealing with in terms of the pandemic?
Yes, actually, it's kind of funny. So again, since I'm in Utah, Gina's actually a day ahead of me. So as far as like the times, this is how I base it. So when I want to talk to Gina, it has to at least be noon or 1 p.m. my time, because I know it's then 8 a.m. her time the next day. So it's kind of interesting. So like we kind of text like a little later in the day, and then we extend it a little bit further. So it's a little bit further on my end, but besides for the time differential, it's the amount of communication is the same, but it's just a couple hours here and there. No big deal. But the day difference is kind of funny. I don't know how it is on her end. It's been kind of crazy on my end.
Yeah, Gina, what's the future like?
It can be quite difficult, especially with this daylight savings time. We haven't experienced daylight savings times yet in New Zealand. So recently I just lost another hour of sleep. Some days I'm waking up at 2 a.m. in the morning in order to have business calls. And so I'll be like on the phone maybe at 1:30 in the morning to like 5:30, then go to sleep for an hour and then hop on another call. So it is interesting and it's tricky at times. I think my team has been very supportive of like afternoon meetings are the best because it's like 7 or 8 Gina's time. I am truly, truly appreciative that I am able to be in another country and still be able to do my job. So if that means waking up at 2 a.m. in the morning in order to do that, I'm okay with doing that. And just really shifting that and trying to make that work. Sometimes I'm up, at 2 a.m. and then, on calls until like 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And it's like whatever makes it work. I think it also says the totality of this virus has shown us that we are all globally connected. No one is free of the impacts of another society, whether that is medically with this virus or economically. And that's also setting the footsteps for the cannabis industry as well. We're affected by what's happening in Israel, in Europe, in Central and South America, definitely impacts us in the United States and in Canada.
I think a lot of us are dealing with additional challenges. I've met people's dogs doing these interviews. I've met, we got an interruption once by a kid doing karate. So it's been a little while just having this merging of family and home life and taking care of ourselves. Balancing that is really difficult and important. And so it's an evolving thing. Before we delve into the larger effects to the cannabis industry, to the world, to your organization from COVID, I guess I'm just curious if there's like one thing that you guys are kind of doing just to take care of yourselves or to remind yourselves, that while we have to step up, we also have to kind of be there for each other as well.
Well, I think I can take that one. For me, it's just kind of really focusing on the communication. I have my master's in health communication, and I think that communication and messaging very much can shape people's realities. And for me, it's just I've tried to stay as close-knit as I can to my family and with my team, and just kind of keep those lines of communications open and allow people to be free to express their emotions and their feelings about this, because I don't think a lot of people expected it. And I don't think they expected it to affect us as much as it has, especially professionally. But what I can say, though, is that it has certainly strengthened the business relationships that NACB has and I have personally. I mean, when we had the earthquake in Salt Lake last week, the amount of emails that I got from business colleagues just checking in on me, making sure that I'm okay, it was a positive thing. It made me feel great. And it's just kind of strengthening those already existing relationships that we have and just allowing us to focus on the good, both in our families and our team members and our business colleagues.
That actually is a great lead in to when we spoke earlier, Gina, you referred to NACB in a way that I think is important and interesting, which is as a voice for the industry, for the cannabis industry. Is that a fair representation of how you guys think of yourselves? And what did NACB do prior to the pandemic?
Well, I think what the NACB has done prior to the pandemic and what we're doing now is really having sort of that same mission of creating best practices with the industry, creating a community who wants to be able to have a voice and stepping up to say what the legislation should be. It's extremely important to us because we know a lot of federal agencies and legislators are disconnected from what cannabis is. What is the science of cannabis? What is this industry? They don't have that expertise, and they really need a group to step up and say, hey, we have experts in our organization that have helped to create these standards, what they deem are the best practices in the industry, and be able to give that to legislators and say, these are what the best practices are. This is what we need to see change legislation wise, and have that our voice of the cannabis industry be heard on a federal level and state legislation level.
And this is clearly a moment for leadership on multiple levels. And part of why we wanted to talk to both of you is that it's a moment for leadership at the head of the organization, but it's also a moment for really a test of communication within leadership, which is where, Adrienne, I think what you were just saying wraps directly into kind of where we find ourselves. And I remember when, just a little over a week ago, the big story on the cannabis industry news sites was about, supply and Chinese packaging, access to Chinese packaging potentially becoming scarce and stuff like that. Adrienne, can you give me a sense of what are the conversations happening in the industry now in a post-COVID world?
For sure. I mean, speaking specifically to supply chain, I think COVID-19 is affecting people in a lot of different ways. It depends on which part of the industry they're in, but we're definitely seeing it in packaging specifically because a lot of brands get their cartons, their labels, potentially their vapes overseas. And obviously this is impacting that. So as far as seed to sale and getting these products on the shelves to retail, it's going to slow some people down and affect them in a major way and affect their numbers and their bottom line, which is unfortunate. But it's also kind of brought to light how essential this product is to people. We're obviously noticing now that some states are deeming cannabis as an essential resource, and some are saying that it is not. And unfortunately, the access is going to change for people, whether you're in a state where it's deemed essential or it's not. So you could have a patient taking cannabis for the same reason as a patient in another state, but one patient is going to have access and the other is not. So that kind of causes a divide there. It's also kind of hinting, as we watch the news and read different articles, you see this word bailouts, like who's going to get bailed out? Is this, citizens that are going to get bailed out personally on their finances? Are these larger businesses and corporations that are going to get bailed out? Where does cannabis fit into that? Where do these large scale operations fit into that? Are they deserving of a bailout? Are they not? It's just kind of making all of these different questions pop up. But I'm thankful for it because it's kind of shaping the cannabis consciousness as a whole. And it's kind of, it's coming to the spotlight and it's making people ask these questions. And I guess the last two areas really are, it's changing the way that people are consuming. And as we were speaking earlier, I brought up this example. If you're at a bar, it's not really normal to see people share the same drink, right? Like unless you're ordering a fishbowl or something and where you all have separate straws, which can be fun at times. Sure, I've done it a few times in my life, not a lot, but it's like, it's not as normal as consumption with cannabis as people potentially sharing the same joint, blunt, bong, whatever, or however you consume. It's definitely causing us to think about harm reduction as far as consumption is concerned. People should not be sharing, roll your own. And then I guess the last part is, we have to think about our prison population. Specifically in California, I know that there's a lot of advocates that are wanting folks to get out of prison because they're in for crimes that are now legal. And especially with Corona, we know that it spreads in areas where there's more dense populations, and specifically when you're in a prison, these people are getting affected more so than others. So it's bringing that to the forefront too. And like I said, just adding and heightening the cannabis consciousness as a whole.
Last year, the Nacb restructured to give 6 of 7 leadership positions to women. Obviously, the two of you are among them. And according to a study by Marijuana Business Daily, women hold 36.8% of leadership roles, which far outpaces the national average of 21% across other U.S. businesses. I'm curious, how intentional was the choice to prioritize diversity among your leadership team?
It was not intentional at all. it just sort of happened. We went to look to see who the best candidate was. And all of a sudden someone pointed out to us, oh, hey, you have like an almost all woman team. And I had to look around for a moment and say, oh yeah, that is true. The other industries I've been in is athletics and also in finance, which is predominantly male industries. And, I teach at a city university of New York, and I've taught sports management. And the same thing happened there, where I'm teaching gender equity issues. And, one of the students pointed out to me that she was the only girl in the class. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't even see that. And not even only this gender diversity, but, we all come from all different backgrounds. So
do you guys take it as a sign of positivity that actually came, not as like, oh, this happened by accident, but, oh, this happened by accident, in the sense that as cannabis is a new and growing industry, it's sort of being birthed in perhaps a world that's a little bit more conscious?
I think it's just a matter of time where all industries really see this change. We're going to constantly see this trend where more women are working in different industries and more women are executive in different industries.
Yeah, and I think I can piggyback off of that really quick. I think the reason why it's coming to the forefront and why it was actually pointed out to us is because the industry, people have been involved in cannabis for 20 years plus, but the industry is just kind of now coming to light, especially to the general public. So it's like, it's this new industry, like people want to know what's going on. And I think it's more on the forefront because it is so new. And a lot of people want to do it the right way. And diversity is a big piece of that. So we're taking active steps to kind of understand, the women's perspective. Like, we were a part of the first study that's being done called the Women in Cannabis Study, and it's headed by Jennifer Wetzel. And it's specifically speaking to women, asking them about their experiences, just so we can get a better understanding. But I really think it's because the industry is so new. But I have very much aligned with Gina in that it wasn't something that we were focused on. Both her and I share the same values in that we want to empower all people around us, not just females, not just males. Again, I think it is because it's so new. And I think the good thing is that people are taking an active step to not only be able to speak intelligently to it, but really understand from a qualitative research basis what people are going through and what that means to the industry in order to make it better and more inclusive. Yeah,
that does bring up other challenges within the industry and relating to diversity. I think one of the large questions here, at least in Illinois, had to do with the licensing of dispensaries and retailers being able to carry cannabis, and specifically here in Illinois, Black-owned businesses getting equal access to licenses. Is that something that you're watching as the young industry grows?
From a social equity standpoint, we don't have a specific program geared towards that, but that's not to say that we're not completely plugged in. We very much try to equip all of our members with the same tangible benefits, with the same, qualities that we have as an association. We don't have anything specifically towards that. But again, it doesn't mean that we're not plugged in and that we don't support what's going on.
Gina, I heard word that your team is actually going to be expanding or has expanded. Would you tell us a little bit more about who's joining the team?
Oh, yes. We have just brought on board Mark Gorman, and he joins us from Discus, which is the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States. And he serves as the Senior Vice President for Government Relationships for the distilled spirits industry for the past 20 years, and has, really been a good advocate and have been able to be successful in creating legislation for them on the federal and state level.
What are some of the things that he might bring from the alcohol industry, or his experience with the alcohol industry, that will be relevant to cannabis?
Well, Discus is the self-regulatory organization for the alcohol industry. And I think that, the cannabis industry has really followed in their footsteps in creating regulations around packaging, but also marketing, promoting, the safetiness of the consumer ages. And even when we're creating our standards, we look towards the alcohol industry, but also the tobacco industry, along with, the experts in the cannabis industry to create what the best practices are. And so we not only want to be able to change the legislation, have a huge impact from people in the industry, but able to have a seat at the table with important discussions for the cannabis industry. And I think he really will be able to allow us to have that opportunity.
I'm curious. This can be to either of you, but I'm curious what thought goes into aligning with someone with a background from the alcohol industry, just from the sort of consumer trust perspective, and maybe what messaging has to go into making that choice.
Well, I think, like I said, as we were talking earlier, cannabis as a whole is extremely, extremely diverse, not only in how you operate, but also kind of your thought process towards the industry and its interactions with other industries. As far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, it's really, why reinvent the wheel if you don't have to? I think we can take a step back and learn a lot from the alcohol industry and learn from what they went through, especially at the end of Prohibition. We can kind of learn how to prioritize education. We can learn how to market in different ways. We can learn how to welcome new audiences, because when you think about cannabis, unfortunately, a lot of people only think about younger people kind of being the poster children for legalization. But in reality, cannabis can help a ton of people in different ways. And I think it's important to kind of take the good from the industry, that the alcohol industry isn't perfect. Neither is cannabis, nor is any industry. But what we can do is share a seat at the table and learn from one another, because there's a lot of things that cannabis is going to bring to the forefront, a lot of social issues, a lot of legislation issues, and a lot of operation issues that other industries won't face, and vice versa. So I think it's good because it gives us a space to collaborate and simply learn from one another on best practices and how to function successfully, ethically, that is doing the best for the public health and consumption.
I just wanted to add to this, alcohol is a regulated substance, as the same as cannabis is. I think it's important that we unite with different industries that can be supportive in our process, because they have been through the same thing and provide us with guidance as well. I think everybody uniting, even in this virus, we have seen that uniting and giving guidance to other people, just even right now with countries providing guidance with each other, is how we're really going to move forward in the world. And, having, being able to view of what the alcohol industry went through and how they have been able to create legislation and to be able to see what those trends were and how it changed from Prohibition until now, is definitely something that the cannabis industry is going to have to go through as well. Right now, even with issues after the Prohibition of people being, in prison because of that, how did that shape, society afterwards, where people released, etc. And I think that we are parallel with that industry right now.
Adrienne, we raised earlier the topic of, as different states are classifying access to cannabis essential or non-essential, as different states start issuing orders to shelter in place, stores open and close, there's a question of access. The flip side of that is getting THC and cannabis products into pharmacies and grocery stores. And you've said in the past that you're looking forward to the day when the public can just pull up to their local store pharmacy and pick up cannabis forward prescriptions like any other. What does the roadmap look like to getting there?
Well, number one, thanks for picking up on the quote in the Daily Grocer. I remember doing that. That was a fun interview. I think I can definitely piggyback off of that excitement. Like one thing that I value is that I'm actually from rural Wisconsin, like raised up in northern Wisconsin. So I understand where some of the mindset is as far as cannabis is concerned and just how foreign it is to some people. And I just kind of like to carry that through in my own acceptance of the industry and how I model my position. But yeah, like I said, I look forward to the day where people can just look at cannabis as medication, go up to the normal pharmacy, consume it like they would any other pharmaceutical product, and go on with their merry way. I mean, it's so taboo to some people, and on the other end, it's so non-taboo. But I hope to continue to bridge that gap, so that it's just not such a foreign concept, and it's just a regular pharmaceutical or recreational product that people just consume. So just bridging that gap is always been my focus, and I'll continue to keep that in the forefront of my work.
Piggybacking on that, Sephora, the makeup line, recently announced that they're going to be doing a new line of CBD makeups. And Gina, I'm just curious, what does it take in terms of testing and standards for a company like that to feel comfortable coming online and introducing a cannabis forward line of products?
Well, right now we are actually putting CBD standards in line, and there are a number of associations out there who have, laboratory standards for CBD and hemp standards as well. And one thing I wanted to piggyback on what we just said about cannabis as a whole is that we have to remember that we're making lots of strides, because CBD can be found in your local grocery store off the shelves. And, a decade ago, it would have never been able to be there. So we are making strides in that progress. And, we also have to remember that cannabis was legal at a time. It has been banned. We are on the same track as alcohol was, where it's prohibited in the United States. But, you were able to go to a pharmacist and they, gave that as a prescription to people, because it certainly does, there's so many medical aspects of it. One important thing that Sephora is also going to have to deal with is to make sure that they, have the best quality product. Is it organic? Just testing it. There have been a lot of tests out there with surveys of how some products don't even have CBD in it, even though it states that it does. And that is really a big problem in the industry as a whole. I know we haven't really mentioned that it's going to be billions of dollar industry. There have been a lot of companies that have come on board and have tainted the industry by selling inferior products. And, that's really going to need to be addressed in the future.
Have there ever been examples of times where the NACB had to speak out or sort of shut something down?
We have spoken. If we do get a case of something happening with our members, we definitely speak to them and, try to find out, and we'll have to put a member on violation if we need to, or not to be associated with the NACB. We try to make sure that annually we check them again to make sure that they are still adhering to all of our standards and, state and federal standards as well.
And if someone sees a shady business practice or a bad product, how can they report something to you?
We have an email on our website, or they can contact any of us, but we have a compliance or info at NACB that they can send us, and people do report to us, and we do follow up with all reports given to us.
Gina Kranwinkel is the CEO of the National Association of Cannabis Businesses. Adrienne Uthe is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at NACB. Gina, Adrienne, I want to thank you guys both so much for joining me.
Of course. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at trichomes.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, please reach out. You can reach the show at highground@trichomes.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at trichomes.com and following us on all social media. The High Ground is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Betend, and thank you for listening.